All right, good morning. Good morning. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for the attendees coming in. We are excited to have you here today for a special webinar. My name is Lindsay Morrison. I'm the Grants Director here at Florida Humanities, if we have not yet met. I'm joined by Stephanie Chill, who is our Grants Coordinator, as well as our special guest, Caroline Klibanoff. So Caroline is joining us today from Made by Us, and this webinar is an extension of our Grant Ed webinar platform. Typically, we do, as you are probably familiar with, funding opportunities, tips and tricks, informational webinars about our grants. Today, and we want to start doing more of these, we want to bring some special interest topics to you to dive down deeper into some important conversations that we should be having that will help you make competitive grant applications, but also just help your organization overall win your mission. So Caroline Klibanoff is the Managing Director of Made by Us, which is the leading nationwide initiative from the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History. Caroline is a public historian who has worked in cultural institutions, including the MIT Museum and Cambridge Historical Society, and has also worked in the civic engagement sector as well. Caroline holds a master's in public history from Northeastern University and a BA in American Studies from Georgetown University. So Caroline, I will turn it over to you and take it away.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. As Stephanie and Lindsay know, I am actually a Florida resident now. I moved, one of those many people that moved to South Florida during the pandemic because it's better here, guys. I'm a complete convert. I love Florida. I hadn't lived here before, but it's been a great experience. So I work remotely. I'm around. If you have questions, after this presentation, happy to help. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and go into a full screen here. So I'm going to share these slides. We will make them available afterwards too. So don't feel like, you have to take notes furiously or anything like that. But I'll give you a high level overview of what we do for Made by Us and about this audience, Millennials and Gen Z. Specifically, we are focused on this 18 to 30 crossover age range between these two generations. So you'll learn a little bit about those generations, their behaviors and trends and interests, how we are engaging them, and how you might try some new tactics to reach this group as well, and why it matters. So some background on Made by Us is that we are a network of now 130 cultural institutions, all shapes and sizes. We have local historical societies with 2 people. We have major, regional museums with 400 staffers, libraries, archives, a variety of sources, all credible, fact-based history institutions. And these organizations have come together because they believe it's important to serve the next generation. Many of your sites and organizations that may already have great programming for school-age children or even K through 12. That's great. That's important. And maybe you serve families and older adults as well. All important populations. But there is definitely a gap in the way that the cultural sector serves people who are 18 to 30. Frankly, right when you need it most, when you are coming of age to vote, you're paying taxes, you're working, all of a sudden, you're a citizen, you're an active citizen, you're an adult, you could lead, you could run for office, and you don't have as many pathways to connect with institutions and the credible resources that they offer. So that's where Made by Us comes in. We are building a bridge between this generation and the institutions and their resources. And there's loads of reasons why. I mean, the trends are pointing in the direction that while there is a lot of interest in history, civics, political activism, I'm sure as we all know, among younger people, they are turning to Instagram, TikTok, online resources, their peers, rather than coming to trusted institutions. They just don't have a relationship with us. It's not that they think we're bad, they just don't think about us at all. And so, like I said, we are trying to build that bridge. So Made by Us is led by 10 institutions. They form a steering committee, and we've been working on this project collectively for about 4 years. And we got officially up and running, like public launch in 2020, March 2020, actually. So we've done the whole program, live during the pandemic. And that's okay, because it's a collective effort anyway. So our vision is that by the 250th anniversary of the United States, which is in 2026, just 4 years away, like 4 years away next week, we will have empowered this next generation to become passionate guardians of those founding ideals, so that they are ready to lead and shape the next 250 years of the United States' future. So like I said, we have a network of 130 institutions. We do a lot of training with these organizations. You are welcome to join. I'll share information about how to do that. We do a lot of training and coaching. That's one side of our work, the other side being audience engagement with this age group. And some of the reasons why, the ways that we work differently are in building capacity. So when we ask our partners, what help do you need? Why can't you reach this group on your own? They say, we don't know how to create relevant programming. We don't know what they need, or you don't understand their behaviors. We don't know how to get them in the door. And we have capacity issues when it comes to being super responsive and timely, which is hard. I mean, we're not news organizations, and even they get it wrong. So the Made by Us method is that by pooling our resources, pooling our knowledge across a coalition, we are able to increase our capacity to respond to changing needs of people. Because frankly, it's not enough. Even if every museum was, TikTok masters, that's not enough. TikTok's not always going to be the thing. Instead of focusing on building the perfect platform or the perfect way to share this information, we need to build our capacity to be flexible and responsive. And so we do that through trainings, learning. One organization tries one thing, another organization tries another. We get back together and share what worked and what didn't. There's a lot of knowledge sharing. We have lightning talks on our coalition calls where people say, we invited YouTubers down to Colonial Williamsburg, or, we started a youth council and here's how that worked. In that sense, we're able to build that capacity and that strength to serve this generation more easily. And there's some safety in numbers, right? Like no one's going out on a limb to try something completely on their own. They have this brain trust of other institutions to work with. So we are growing. You're welcome to join, and I hope you will be a part of this. When it comes to reaching our audience of 18 to 30-year-olds, we see this as part of a continuum that you see yourself on. So if you are at the bottom of this continuum, you're just starting out, you might think history is boring. I took that class in school, no thanks. Along the way, you might find, okay, history is useful. Like, look, the Supreme Court is ruling on so many things this week. I wish I understood how we got here. How does that even work? And then we like to move people along this line to history is essential and I'm a part of shaping it, to see themselves as part of the story. And part of our mission, we rest at this intersection of young people, history, and civics. And the civics piece really matters. The benefit that we as humanities institutions have to offer is narrative and helping people see themselves as part of the story. There are so many get out the vote initiatives. More power to them. It's important to vote. I think we can all agree. Young people today do not feel connected to the story in a meaningful way. And that is a big part of why they don't vote if they don't vote. Many of them do vote, by the way. They vote in roughly the same numbers as other generations. But I will say that instead of, what they don't respond well to is, vote, vote, vote. It's so important, you have to vote. What they do respond well is seeing themselves as part of the story, understanding why it matters, and seeing themselves as part of this, important path that if they don't take action and understand how government works, what is the future going to look like? It's not going to be in their hands. So just wanted to say that's a sort of superpower of history and humanities institutions there. We do things a little bit differently, some of which I'll share with you today that, tactics you can emulate as well. The main thing to understand is we meet young people where they are and we put their needs first. That sometimes causes conflict. Sometimes it means saying, even though we in our institution have this expertise, we think we know what people should know, putting that aside for a moment and inviting some understanding of what does this audience actually want to know today? What are they curious about? Where are they starting from? So we're audience first across all accounts. We build programs that are digital or in person. We share content. We're almost like a lab for new content formats on different platforms, different methods. And we're building these pathways in for someone who maybe went to museums in elementary school on a field trip and doesn't have an adult membership, or who never went and their family didn't go. And now they're an adult and they're thinking, where can I get information that is trustworthy to understand my area? And so we work in a variety of lanes. And I always find it important to say, just a reminder again, like we are not working K through 12. Civics ed and history ed is so important in those sectors, but that's just not what we do. We're trying to serve this group that's out of school, or at least out of high school. So we work through entertainment and media, digital and interactive, and then communities and causes has been a really interesting avenue for us to put history in those places. We share history tied to current events. We have done partnerships with Airbnb, BuzzFeed, youth relevant brands, Teen Vogue, trying to like plant almost historical expertise in those popular spaces and then build a bridge back to these institutions. So I'll just share a little bit here about this process, because this is something you can adopt at certainly the first part. And if you're curious about how this might work or ways to do this that are easy, like I said, please join up, and we do a lot of training on this. But the most important thing here is that we operate in a loop so that we can learn and evolve, rather than sort of a program development process that's ABC. It's a circle. So we start with understanding, what does our audience need? What can we meet of those needs? What is that vision? And then we do a lot of prototyping. So it's evolutionary and it's iterative the whole way through. As I said, because we don't want to build the ultimate platform for 2026 today. We want to test and learn in smaller ways to build our collective capacity. So now I'll share a little bit about this audience in particular, and ways that we can reach them. And for those that are joining now, you can always ask questions in the chat, feel free, and we'll share these slides at the end, and we'll have time for questions at the end as well. So why do we serve this audience? And as I said, not just because they are the new voting citizens, they're new leaders, they are new to work. Look around, they're obviously driving the national conversation right now. That's probably true of all youth at all points in time, but it's very clear right now. At the same time, Millennials and Gen Z are the largest generations. They have massive, massive buying power. I'm not sure that most cultural institutions have effectively tapped these groups in to become donors, members, supporters. That's obviously of interest to most institutions. And they also have great cultural power. So they're driving the conversation, they're looking for information, and we're focused on them. So we serve this cross section of 18 to 30, the 20 somethings roughly. And right now that's a cross section of Gen Z and younger millennials, that as time goes on, there'll be more and more Gen Z. Gen Z is typically, considered being born 1997 to 2017. Some organizations say post 9/11, but the main thing you need to know about Gen Z, if they were born post 9/11, that means they were about 10 or 11 during the Great Recession. They have grown up in an era of violence, school shootings, a pandemic, when they were graduating high school and in college. They are sometimes called the disaster generation. I think that's a little bit extreme, but if you look at like World War I generation, but they are certainly no stranger to reality hitting hard. That's in a very big contrast to millennials, grew up in a completely different circumstance in the late 80s, 90s, an era mostly of prosperity in the United States, not without its challenges, but they just came out with a completely different experience. And it wasn't until they were in high school or college that, the Great Recession hit and affected their adulthood. So we'll get into that a little bit more. Okay, great. Now I'll get to your question as well. So we cannot serve all of Gen Z and millennials all at once. You know, no question. That's a huge, huge amount of people. Right now, that's more than 50%. More than 50% of the country's population is millennials, Gen Z, or alpha, which is younger. They're massive. We have divided this into some sub-segments that we focus on serving, and I think that this will be helpful to you as well. These groups are the ones that we are focused on first. They are most likely to want what humanities institutions have to offer. So in Gen Z, which is the younger set, we have this group called good getters. This is, you know, what a research firm that we work with calls them. They're 32% of the generation. They are very passionate about making a difference in the world. They value being informed. They're socially conscious. They're very pragmatic. Like, they are different from millennials in that way, super pragmatic. Like, what do I do today? Do I need to donate? What kind of job do I need to have to make enough money? They're career oriented, and they're trendsetters among their peers, which was a big reason why we picked to focus on them first. We want to start a wave of interest in history. For millennials, we look at holistic self-helpers. They also care about being informed, being educated. They value self-improvement, a lot around health and wellness, which again is a role for humanities institutions to tap into. We can become spaces for reflection, for mental health, for wellness. That is very adjacent to the work that we do. And I think that's an area where we can lean into to reach this generation more. So we're working on these sub-segments for now, and a little bit about them, which is pretty much representative of the generation as a whole. They're very socially conscious. You know, they are very diverse. The one thing that everyone always says, maybe you already know this about Gen Z, is they are racially and ethnically very diverse, sexual orientation, you know, very diverse. They have a variety of political opinions. They are not a monolith by any means. They're very educated. They make a lot of money. I know people don't like to say that because there's obviously, you know, if they're working minimum wage jobs, I'm not saying that that's them, but when you look at their annual household income, they're just much more focused on that than other generations. And so they have been more successful already, even though, you know, only about half of the generation is over 18. They are really averse to political labels, at least right now. That could change over time. We will see, but certainly they don't really have strong party identification politically. So what this group needs, and this I would extend to most of the rest of this younger generation from institutions like ours, they're looking for you to be an ally and an activist. Don't say nothing when something happens. That's hard. Obviously, that's a challenge for institutions that maybe move at a slower pace because we want to make sure to get it right, or, you know, we have to remain politically nonpartisan. But they are looking for you to be an ally in it with them, be in the moment with them. Whatever struggles they are facing, acknowledge that up front. They want you to help them become their best selves. That's, you know, as I said, where wellness can come in, reflection. If you have green spaces at your organization, if you have, you know, spots for people if you take people on a community bike ride, if you have yoga, these types of things, they want to become their best selves, and they are looking for that from brands and institutions. Trust is key. Like I said, they're turning to, you know, Instagram and podcasts for this type of information. There is a hunger for historical context, but they don't know where to go. They would also like to use your institution's knowledge to discuss these issues with their boomer or Gen X parents. So they are looking to be able to say, look, mom and dad, this is legit because I got it from, you know, History Miami Museum. And then, you know, social media is not a catch-all. It's not the solution for everything, but it is becoming more and more a place to go beyond marketing. And I think probably most of your organizations have already made that switch. You know, it's not just about advertising. You should provide some information of value right there on the platform. So keeping that in mind. So holistic self-helpers, part of the millennial segment here, somewhat similar. They're also diverse. As I said, they're interested in health and wellness. I'll share these slides after. They have a little bit more of less of an aversion to labels. So they are less, Gen Z is much more, we refuse to be labeled, you know, whether that's gender or political affiliation or identity. I mean, for our youth fellows, we don't even ask any more questions about race and gender. We just ask, are there any groups you want to identify with? Because their identity is very complex. You know, they may want to be known for parts of the work that they do, their family structure, being the first in their family to go to college. They may want to be known for their religion. They see it as kind of multifaceted. For this group of millennials, they would like you to be pragmatic help. So when that comes to sharing content in exhibits or programs, giving them something useful that they can use today. That is a takeaway. It's not enough to just learn something interesting. They would like it to be useful to answer a question that they have. And some of these I've mentioned before, and I'll just mention the last one here on inspiracy theory. That's, you know, they are looking for inspiration as a place to start. That's definitely a role I think that humanities organizations can play as well. So please feel free, you know, to share any questions. I have some slides here on what these mean, what we've learned in our 2 or 3 years of working with this age group and matching up history and our skills with them. Some ideas for immediate application here, and I'll just go through these, and then, you know, if you have questions along the way, just let me know. First is transparency. Museums and cultural institutions especially are a black box to young people, possibly to all generations. You know, I think when you're in it, it's hard to see that. But if you've ever tried to build a network of museums and you start going on their websites and looking for staff emails, staff names, sometimes they're not even listing who's at these organizations. And, you know, maybe you have reasons for that, but this generation really would like to see names and faces on your social, on your emails. Who are these people? Who's deciding this history? That's an issue of trust. They also want to see the source material. They don't really want to be told what to think. You can lead them to the questions to ask about the source material. You can show them, you know, here's one interpretation, here's another, what do you think? But they really do want to get as close as possible to making up their own mind. And then, you know, simplicity is really key. I think this is hard. I know that design has been one of the constraints mentioned when we work with our partners. Like, you know, we're competing now with Netflix, with everyone else on Instagram, with the trending podcasts. Our competition as museums is not each other by any means. You know, people are not deciding which museum do we go to today from all across the country, or which humanities program do we take part in this week. It's, do we do that? Or do we meet our friends, you know, for a picnic? Or do we go to a farmer's market? Or do we watch the new Netflix thing that everyone's watching? So simplicity does matter in the sense that you want to emulate what these other brands are doing in terms of the visual aesthetic. Making things shareable is important. It is the way that your stuff will spread around. And I will say, you know, since most folks here are probably Florida-based institutions, we do, with Made by Us, try to help institutions reach a nationwide audience, not because, you know, your local is so important. And Gen Z is the first group that is really looking for local connection. They want to show up, they want to volunteer. Like 75% of Gen Z are looking for places to volunteer locally and to meet others in their area. However, you still want to have some national reach, because you just won't be on their radar. If you're not showing up on their Instagram, if other people around them aren't talking about you, it's a big challenge. So if you can make your content shareable, if you can have a place at your museum that is a great place to take a photo and people can share that they went there, that's an ad for you. If you can put something on social media that is something another person would want to share. It's not going to be about your institution. It's going to have to be about something they care about. That is really great. And then, using humor where appropriate. It's a challenge for sure. We've done a TikTok study the first quarter of this year. We did some studies on memes and using them. It's not easy by any means. I don't want to ever say it is, but it is a really nice avenue for connection if you're able to work in that kind of voice. It's not for everyone. A few more ideas. As I mentioned this earlier, in terms of being an ally, it's important for this generation that you address what's happening in the world and that you address what they know. They would rather see a response and engagement with the issues of the day than silence. And sometimes that isn't even the issues of the day. Sometimes it's just acknowledging their perception. So I'll give you an example, and hopefully this organization doesn't mind. We work with Stratford Hall, which is Robert E. Lee's family home. They're part of our network. Great site, and they do a lot of great work in Virginia. They put up a social media post on Instagram all about General Robert E. Lee on his birthday, and nowhere in his description of his life mentioned his time in the Confederacy. Sure, it was just 4 years of his life. It wasn't even like possibly the biggest thing he did, who knows? But for this generation, for most regular people who are not historians, the main thing you know about Robert E. Lee is that he was in the Confederacy. So not leading with what people know as a point of familiarity and as a point of acknowledgement felt like they were trying to hide it and say, he has done all this other stuff. Let's just put that whole, leaving the country thing aside. That didn't work. And they got a lot of comments that were really negative about that. So I think if they have, if you come up front and we had this whole discussion with them, it was a great learning experience for us too, because, we hadn't seen that exact thing happen before. If you come out and say, most people think of Robert E. Lee as the Confederate general. Today's his birthday. Here's some other things about him. Already people feel invited in. You're starting with what they know. You're acknowledging something that they may have, feelings about. That's a better way to go. And this goes with my point number 2 here, which is cop to your mistakes. And if someone complains or has feedback, it's great. That's an engagement that we wish we had in history institutions. We want to see people engaging with the history, and inviting a discussion can build trust. A few other things here. Highlight local impact. That is really good. We have a lot of organizations in our coalition that during the pandemic grew food and gave it to the community. If they have a historic garden, or they are polling places for elections, or they offer, certain sensory hours that for certain parts of the population. And I think showing those stories is really key. This generation, younger people under 30 do want to see that you are making an impact in the community, that you care about things beyond just here's the history and beyond just, come to our program. They really want to see you giving back. And then finally, invite response. I think I've covered that in some other ways here. So I'm just going to share you a little bit of our process, and then I will turn it over to questions. And I'm happy to share more about this process if you have questions afterwards, but this has been really effective for us. It's not enough, to just say, we love history. This is going to be so interesting. Let's make it. And our team has to gut check all the time, oh, I found this really interesting story about FDR packing the court, trying to pack the Supreme Court, and now that's in the news. Let's tell the story. It's going to be great. It still requires us taking a step back and saying, we think that's interesting. What does our audience need? And how can we meet that need? So we follow human-centered design approach. This is great, when you have unknown constraints, you don't exactly know where you're going, you know where you want to get, but you don't know how. You're living in a pretty crazy world where news keeps blowing up every day, and we just went through a global pandemic and things are uncertain. That's the time to use human-centered design. It really helps you ground it in what do people need right now. So I've already shared our process here. The key is to start with the needs of the user, looking at their behaviors. So beyond just what they say, you know, young people say they want to go to local programs and volunteer. Are they actually doing it? You have to find a way to measure that. Looking at their references, so the landscape, that's how we arrived at the conclusion that we're not competing against other history institutions, we're competing against the Instagram accounts and Netflix. And then you can look at those landscape references to understand, what do you want to emulate? Where do you start? I'm missing a W there. Who do you want to work with? And who are you competing with when you are sharing these things? So I'll do a quick example and then I will hand it over for some questions. I know I'm flying through this, but you will get all the slides and it's being recorded. So the first thing you can do if you're planning a program, you're an institution, you think, okay, we want to do something on our state's anniversary. I don't know when Florida became a state, but say that anniversary is coming up, we all want to do something about it. The key is to start with some audience empathy. So you've decided it's an anniversary and we want to get 18 to 25-year-olds there. Anybody in the USA can know about this. Let's make it about let's say it's about women's right to vote. Or they're interested in learning about women's history content. They're an online audience. They're newer to seeing us as a resource for them. These are things you decide as an institution when you're thinking, who's the audience for this program? You've decided this. This is like the step one. From there, you can start to extrapolate, even without any research, even without any, of our made by us data, you can start to extrapolate. If you want to reach an 18 to 25-year-old audience, you already know some things about them. You know when they were born. So therefore you can see, how old were they at various big moments in history? What events have affected their lives? If they are this age, they weren't yet alive for 9/11 or they don't remember it. They would be children when the financial crisis hit, when the Great Recession hit. So their childhood growing up in that climate, probably of some level of austerity there. They would have only been able to vote or be politically active in 2016 and 2020. Not the most normal elections we've ever had, okay? Like not the most smooth running, just, two parties duking it out. Very contentious since, 2016 and 2020. That's been their experience at best. So they just don't know what came before. For their life stage that they're in now, they have only been really acting as independent adults since 2016. And some are still just, emerging into this phase of life. I think, and I know I have some of my interns on the call too, who are in this age cohort, but it is a challenge for institutions to get in this mindset because it's a specific phase of life that most institutions don't always have staffers in this, because they're already working when they come to work for you. So just putting yourself in this empathy mindset of what this generation experience is like. So you already know some things, even just without any data, any external learning, you can start to get in the empathy mindset. And then you can take that a step further. If you know that they're interested in learning more about history, that's who we want to reach. We're not going for, people who never are going to come to our institution. We're trying to reach interested, curious people. We just need to build a path. You still have to ask them questions. What do they know? How do they define that interest? They probably aren't calling it history. And I can tell you for a fact, we learned this the hard way. They aren't calling it civics. They use other words. They might call it activism. And for us, as institutions, that might be like, activism, we don't do that. But they just have a different language for some of these things. And then where do we think they are going for that? If they're not coming to our institutions, where are they looking? And how do they see us? Do they see us as something for families? I think that's a big blocker a lot of the times. They don't feel like it's a place for them and their friends to come. So putting yourself in asking some of these kind of tough questions from that mindset is already such a great way to be able to better reach this audience. Doesn't mean you need to reconfigure everything you do. It doesn't mean you need to redesign your programs. You don't need to orient just around this audience. You probably serve all people. However, if you are building a program for this audience, getting in this mindset will help you make better choices that will serve them. So, and I'll just show this again and then I'll close up here. But when you start with their needs, and then you can understand their behaviors, you can look around at the references for where they're going instead. And then from there, you can start to make choices about how best to serve this audience. So for us, it's worked really well. I have, plenty of examples. It takes time. It takes an investment of empathy up front, but it is ultimately the only way I've seen this work for this audience. When we started Made by Us, we had a great consultant in the audience when the board presented this great idea, and Kaz Breschard, she stood up and said, you can build this, but they won't come. And that really has how we got on this audience-driven approach. And that has proven true every time. If we do it from a top-down way, it just doesn't work. It might be good for our institutions, but only in the short term. So just wanted to share how that's worked for us. And yeah, thank you so much for your time. Would love to hear any questions.
Thank you so much, Caroline. I feel like we're all snapping for you from behind each of our screens, but that was really good. And I love how you left us with some practical takeaways, starting with something just very simple as putting names and faces on the staff bios on our webpage. That's not something that would have crossed my mind, but you're right. People do love seeing that, personal connection, adding those source materials you mentioned, connecting to what Gen Z and millennials care about. And then also getting involved with issues of the day and acknowledging, and you mentioned that Robert E. Lee post. And that actually jumps into my first question. And while I ask this, I encourage people listening to add their own questions to the Q&A. We see one that we'll get to as soon as I ask this first question, but don't feel afraid to ask Caroline those tough questions that you may be thinking about that you're too afraid to ask. So go for it. So my first question is, we get that we need to acknowledge some issues of the day and talk about them, and they're very important. But how do we do so and remain nonpartisan? A lot of our organizations, our constituents and our memberships are diverse and, in what they believe politically. And as organizations, we may need to, seek state or federal funding. And it's just important to remain nonpartisan as a whole. So how do we toe that line of being authentic and reactive to the current situation, but remaining somewhat neutral?
Yeah, it's a good question, and one that I do get asked a lot because it's hard and it's getting harder every day. Let's be honest, the news cycle is so fast, and really since the pandemic started, there's been some level of disillusionment among this generation, and it's hard to point to things that are even hopeful or inspiring because sometimes there's a resistance to that. So a few things. I would say one is that this generation is not looking to humanities organizations to be like super hip, cool fellow kids. No offense to us. I know we're cool, but they are not looking for us to be the same exact thing as their TikTok stars or, YouTubers. They don't want to see us using like all the slang. They don't want to see us, trying too hard. And so that's a nice thing. They actually want us to be the grownups in the room. And especially if you are that type of institution, like we have the National Archives on our steering committee. I can tell you for a fact, young people do not want to see the National Archives be anything but the National Archives. They want that gravitas. They're saying that is actually the value of the National Archives. It's credibility. They have seriousness to them. They have a staff. So it doesn't mean they can't have fun, but that they're looking for something from that they already offer. So that's one thing, is don't give up your strength, in thinking that you're pursuing a younger audience. You should still be who you are as an institution, and figuring out your strengths is actually another one of the first things you can do, is think about like, what's our special ingredient that we bring to the table that's like, we cannot yield on that. On the partisan things, I think they are looking for nonpartisan information. They're looking to make up their own mind. So sharing things that are credible, sharing the raw sources, pointing to the facts, and then let them draw their own conclusions. And then just another note on some of the language, because we received an NEH grant as well for our civic season program in the summer, which is our biggest program. It was great. And we are trying to reach this younger audience. And there were some moments, I will say, like our youth fellows who were fantastic and designed the program were coming up with slogans for our stickers. And one of them was, "Hot girls love history." And I'm just like, I am just not seeing the National Endowment for the Humanities getting behind a sticker that says that. It's to many people that feels like it's about girls. Gen Z, our fellows told me like that is gender inclusive language now. Still, you have to make a decision as a leader that's saying like, let's make the decision for the greater good, for something that's going to last more than just a trend. And again, like, what are they really looking for us to do? Is this a make or break decision? So I think just paying attention to some of the ways that you are perceived already, and probably you're perceived as being somewhat serious, trusted, and like a, institution in a building. And so you don't necessarily want to give that up just to have a trendy sticker. So, yeah.
Perfect. And I'll ask the first question that came in time, and then Stephanie will ask the second one. So the first question is, during the product launch phase, are you placing paid ads with this campaign?
We've done some paid advertising. Yeah, we're doing, our civic season is between Juneteenth and July 4th, and we're doing that now. You don't need to do paid advertising, and also good luck, because anything you share on Facebook, Instagram ads that has anything civic related content is perceived as a political ad. It's very, very hard to get ads through right now. We haven't seen it being overwhelmingly, effective. So we are using them. We'll be able to report back to our coalition after this campaign of what's worked, if that helps anyone learn, but it's definitely not the only way to advertise.
Great. And the second question is, should we emphasize recorded programming on YouTube, podcasts, and other on-demand platforms instead of attending a live event?
That's a really good question. Okay, so I can share after this call, we had our youth fellows come up with criteria for programming that would be included in the civic season. And civic season is a great entry point, by the way. If you didn't participate this year, we'll do it again next year. We just received a Mellon grant to do this. And this year, 300 organizations joined in. They submitted 750 resources. So things like live events, walking tours, their podcasts, some Zoom panels, some guides, blog posts, things that help this generation understand the American experience and their place in it. The tagline is explore what you stand for. So we offer so many variety of ways to do that. YouTube is great. What we did see loud and clear from our fellows in this criteria for the programming for civic season was fewer passive Zoom panels. Just really didn't land that well. And we were all doing that during the pandemic. They do want to go to in-person events, preferably not a panel. Like, can we break away from, putting 4 people on a stage and that's the format? They would like things that are more interactive. I think even if you have like different booths, you could have the cart, right? Like the museum cart, which we think is for children. Who doesn't love that as an adult, as a young adult? There's ways to kind of age that up appropriately. So the interactive ways are better. If you are doing things on YouTube, if you are doing things on social media, asking questions back, engaging in the chat, making sure it's not just a one-way street, is definitely better. And we've seen organizations use more of these interactive formats, like Twitter Spaces, Clubhouse. These are places where you can pull up people from the audience virtually, and they are able to speak. Risky, but it's more engaging. So as we try those things, we'll be sharing out what we learn.
We had another question that I think went back to the conversation of staying nonpartisan or neutral in the face of speaking to days of the events of the day. Would it be possible to accomplish that by offering programs that are reflective of multiple perspectives, such as a program or discussion that offers both a pro-life and a pro-choice view, if you're talking about women's rights or reproductive rights?
It's one way to do it, definitely. And the better benefit of doing something like that is that you would probably be bringing community partners. So your staff is not getting up there and saying their views, but you are building relationships with other community organizations that frankly may have more inroads to this audience than you do. So you're getting those activists or people up there on stage. That's a great way to go about it. Another thing is just to share the context and the history. Our entire team, like we have a small team, but our content creation team in the last 2 weeks has gotten such an education ourselves on how the government works and civics, as we're trying to share information about the Supreme Court ruling and, okay, this moves to the states. How does that work? What can Congress do? I mean, I live in this content every day, and I still need a refresher on, you know, the branches of government and how they work and what their limits are. And that just reminds me that for most people, their last civics class was in the 8th grade. I mean, at best, if you had one. And that's a long time until you need to put that information into action today, when you actually need to know how it works. And so providing that basic kind of 101 information is very valuable. So I think even before you get into like, what are people's views on an issue, providing the context for how do you figure out what you believe? And then kind of mapping that to different historical debates can help as well.
And we just had one more come in. After building trust, value, and a connection to this generation, do you see that this group is receptive to becoming museum members or volunteering?
Yes, definitely. I mean, I still think that there needs to be a tier for museum membership at many places that accommodates their financial situation or their lifestyle. Like, they're not going to become a member if you're only open 9 to 5 and they can never get there. They want some special, you know, nighttime events or a weekend or a beer garden, something that they would have done anyway with their friends, but now they're supporting an institution. They have a real desire to support local community organizations. So if you can position yourself as that, that's great. Most of you are local community organizations. It's just about, you know, how you frame it. And then I do see, after we've had our youth fellows, interns, they do tend to want to stay involved with these types of institutions. As I said in the start of this talk, it's just a black box before them. Like, they just don't understand what the roles, I didn't know, who knows that stuff, what the roles are, how this works, how it's funded, who makes the decisions, who's presenting the information. Just the experience of going to a museum or historical site is so different than the experience of working or preparing programs for a museum and historic site. And that if we could make that a little more transparent, a little closer of a relationship, I think that would be better for everyone. I think we would become more valuable community assets that people want to preserve and protect, even when they're 22. So, yes.
Well, that's all of our questions, but I had maybe one more, and we'll see if any more trickles in. But I will confess, I'm a millennial, but I am one of those elder millennial, and I have zero skill in creating memes. That's just not me. That will never be me. I will not have that bone in my body. So how do maybe organizations who have volunteer staff or a few paid staff that are, you know, in the older generations, how do they even start trying to think about creating content that would engage Gen Z and millennials that just seems so different from how they communicate with their patrons? Is it trying to get some unpaid volunteers if they're financially strapped? Is it chatting with their family members? What are your practical recommendations?
It's hard. It's hard. Like, if you follow an institution that has amazing funny content and memes, they have found a diamond in the rough of a social media manager who is working really hard, and probably there's a lot that gets on the cutting room floor that, you know, that we don't see. But I will say one way to do that is to work with existing creators. That's just kind of we haven't done this exactly. We've worked with influencers, but I think if you were to work with content creators who already create maybe civic minded content, maybe history content, and invite them, say, like, you can tour, you can get into collections, you can have a Q&A with our curator, like, get the info you need, and make this is like an artist in residence almost. And, you know, they would be creating that type of content for you that's aimed at this audience. And you can have final say. I mean, it's not like they just have free, you know, post anything. I don't know any organization where a post just goes up anyway, you know, even if it's by your staff. So there's usually some review or a process. So that's one way to hire out for that with people who already do it well, knowing that we just might not have those skills in-house. And the other thing is if you are, because this is Florida Humanities, if you can lean into the local humor, North Carolina Museum of History does this very, very well. They do a lot of state-based humor and like inside content. And it's more than just memes. It's actually really interesting. And even if you're not from North Carolina, you're getting an education in barbecue, the names of towns, how they're pronounced, you know, unique things. And I think I'm in Miami and I've seen this. There's quite a lot of local content creators that their whole thing is Miami and its uniqueness. And I think if you could lean into that for Florida or for your town or city, that's definitely one way to step into that role. That's a little bit less intimidating than, you know, being like Saturday Night Live. So, yeah.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
I've got one question that's kind of related to that. You talked about the difference of like terminology sometimes. Do you find that that is specific to regions or areas, or is there something that this 18 to 20 to 30 group is using more so overall for terms like history or civics, as you mentioned, that, you know, we should know? Like, do you have anything off the top of your head you can give as an example, or is there a resource for people to look online?
Yes, I'm going to share this link to the PACE funders just did a language study. It's really interesting. And I don't actually recall. Oh yeah, there are some age breaks in it for how different language around democracy and civics are received and used. It's a really good resource. It changes all the time. And so I think that's the other piece is it's not even just about getting the language 100% right today. It's about building some type of flexibility in that before, maybe it's once a quarter, you're doing a scan of social media posts around topics you cover, and you're saying, what are they saying? How are they saying it? Just building that into your process, the listening, I think, into the process is how I would approach it. Because, I mean, part of the reason we didn't make a Hot Girls Love History sticker, many reasons, but one is that phrase could be out of date next year, you know, and then then you really look out of touch. So building the listening in. I don't have an example off the top of my head, except to say that one of the things we decided going into this civic season was to not use the word civics. It's in the name, but we decided in our content, let's not use it. Okay, we used it in probably every single post. We can't break away. And this is us, like we're in deep with this audience, and it was still so hard for our team, which includes, you know, Gen Z people, to break away from this sort of like top-down, like professional language, I guess. So we're gonna try again next year. Got to get some new verbiage in there, but it is an ongoing challenge.
We got a really good comment too in our chat that influencers, if they may be a little expensive, and we do agree with you there, they've seen success with local event calendars and blogs specializing in content marketing. So really good suggestion there.
Definitely. And influencers are expensive. And I will say a lot of the times they are really about their personal brand. Like, I think there's a difference between kind of a content creator person who wants to do that for brands and like organizations like ours, and then an influencer who is just about their personal brand. We've done both ways. And I don't know. It's not a must do on the influencers. So.
Yeah. Well, I just want to thank you so much again, Caroline, and thank you, Stephanie, for joining us as well. As a reminder, we will be sharing the slides with all who registered for this, and the recording will be up on our Grant Ed platform likely next week. We will also share information about how to join up with Made by Us. Florida Humanities highly encourages it. We have been a partner of theirs for 3 years now, and they are just so great on communicating best practices and keeping in touch with their partners and hosting really good discussions with national partners. So you hear some best practices from other people as well. So I cannot recommend them enough.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. And yes, I'll get everyone information to you. I'll get it to you, Lindsay, about joining and my contact if anyone has questions. But I really appreciate the chance to share more about this. We're immersed in what this generation needs every day. And so it's great just to be able to share what we're learning with a wider audience.
Great. Thank you, Caroline. Thank you all, and have a good holiday weekend.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.